right, good afternoon and welcome. How many of you would like to have more people using your products? All right. How many of you are listening? That was pretty much everyone, which is great. Well, today we're going to get into some detail. I'm a details guy. I love the details. And we're going to get to talking about actual things that we've done on Facebook's growth team to help people and help remove friction and help them help them successfully start using many of the products we've built. But before we get to any of that detail, before we talk about examples or tactics, there's some really important things that we need to cover first. Because none of this stuff works in the first place if we don't check one crucial graph. So I'll show you that graph and how to think about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about team. How many of you think fundamentally about how your company is actually set up or how the working group is structured in order to achieve growth? It's not usually something that most people think about. They're usually thinking about, what am I going to change about my products? What features should I add? But a lot of what this boils down to is actually how you structure your team and how you structure your company. Okay, so the graph that I mentioned. Before you do any of the things I'm going to talk about, or that Denise is actually going to talk about after I'm done starting this off, before you do any of the stuff in that section, this is the crucial graph to check. You need to check your retention. In a lot of times around the Bay Area, you'll hear, or you talk to VCs or things like that, they'll use this term called product market fit. How many of you heard the phrase product market fit thrown around? All right. A lot of people hear that phrase, but don't actually know what it means. And I'm a numbers and graph, and I think in terms of math and data. And product market fit is basically this graph. Essentially, if you take everyone who started using your product for the first time and you group them all together and you graph them, and on the bottom you have days from the first time that everyone used the product, how many of them have come back? What is the percentage of people who've come back? And you look at that, if that graph does not go flat, if it does not reach some steady state, if it just keeps going down and down and down towards zero, then you really can't grow that thing. And so fundamentally, so often, companies or people who are excited about their new thing will jump straight to, I'm going to buy a bunch of ads or I'm going to drive a whole bunch of acquisition before checking retention. And if you don't have a flat retention curve at a reasonable level above zero, then none of the other things that we're going to talk about today you should even really worry about. Okay. What does that look like if you don't have a flat retention curve? This is my daughter's bucket when we went to the beach. And she kept going down to the ocean and filling it up to bring it back to fill up her lake that she'd made. And it just kept being empty by the time she got there. And she kept going back down. And after about 4 or 5 trips, I was like, oh my God, I can't handle this. You need to stop. Because it was just like if you were trying to grow something or trying to get people to use a product, but everyone who tried it eventually churned off and stopped using it, is exactly like this analogy of the leaky bucket. The converse is also true, right? If you have a great product that people love and when they start using it, they keep using it, this is going to happen, right? No. And it's a good thing, too, because I guess if it weren't true, I wouldn't have a job. So that's nice. Okay. A lot of times people think, okay, this whole area of thinking, optimizing things, making them easier to get through, that's really like a startup company problem, or only brand new products have to worry about that. I can tell you that's explicitly not the case. This is a graph of total advertisers on Facebook. And you can see we had modest growth. This was about in 2012 or so. And we had modest growth here. And the only problem was that Facebook had just gone public. And back then, we had a real challenge with advertisers and growing revenue. And so we started thinking about, can we apply some of the same principles of thinking about helping people to make it easier to use our products on the user side? What if we took some of those ideas and applied them to the advertiser side, right? Advertisers are people too. They need to successfully use flows or find things. And I can not only tell you what happened when we started the advertiser growth team on a product that existed for more than 7 years. We went from a very slow rate of growth to over 300% year-on-year growth 1 year later. So the same things that you can do for an early stage company or a mid-stage company apply to very mature products as well. And it's definitely not true that this stuff only matters if you're a startup. I can not only tell you the month that we changed the trajectory of active advertisers for Facebook, I can tell you the hour. This is a graph of week-on-week advertiser acquisition. And back then, we did pushes on Tuesday. So this was a random Tuesday. And you can see advertiser acquisition doubled week-on-week. That's because we launched 2 things. The first was the thing on the top, which was very simple. It was, if you were a business, you had a business page, we would basically turn your business page into an ad and show you this is what an ad for your business would look like. And then we also I did an analysis to take a look. It turned out, if you looked at how many people had created ads and where they had found the link to do that, so many sources of people just finding the link to create an ad had been taken down by random teams. So like, for example, on the photos sharing thing, there used to be a link to create an ad, and that just got removed by the photos team. They were like, oh, guess I don't need this here. Various other teams had removed links. And so one of the very basic things we did was just add a link to make it easy to find. And launching those 2 things doubled the rate of advertiser acquisition. So often what is going to matter is very simple things, very basic things. I like to say that growth and thinking about how to help people use your product and discover it is a game of inches. It's like a rowing team. And often these races are won by just a bow ball, just the ball at the front of the boat, or half a stroke. So often it's the small things that matter, and doing a lot of little things right, adding up to make a big difference. Okay. So that's why we think about growth and growth marketing differently than a lot of other companies. There's 2 main ways. One is who we hire, who we think about. What is the skill set you need for someone who's actually going to be able to make a big impact for your company driving growth? Okay? The second thing is, once you've found that person, how do you set them up for success? So company structure and how a working team functions is critical to being able to do this effectively. Talk about the first thing in terms of people. What do you look for in someone who's an expert in growth? The first thing we look for is someone who has a background in digital marketing, SEO, SEM, paid ads, something like that. In that kind of a discipline, you get used to understanding that small differences and small optimizations on your creative or your landing pages matter. And that's an important set of experience. But it's not enough just to think about that digital marketing background. The folks on this team need to be able to speak to the engineers and to be able to hang with engineers. And so SQL and being able to do some coding, I think, is absolutely critical. It's also really important that the folks you hire for this are able to answer their own questions. if you have someone who's really good at optimizing something, but is not able to actually identify the biggest opportunity with analysis, then they're going to be always waiting for someone else to get the answers, and that's not great. And finally, creative problem solvers. People who can look, and once they've identified, like, this is the big opportunity, can they come up with a ton of ideas about what to do about it to make it better? Okay, so you hire that kind of a person and you onboard them onto your company. That's going to, like, instantly drive growth, right? Definitely not. Because fundamentally, you got to set that person up for success. And in order to do that, we think a lot about how someone who's an expert in growth needs to be embedded in the product team. We think about this idea of a growth product team at Facebook. And it basically is a group of people who all the disciplines you need to actually affect and change the product, PM, design, analytics, and engineering, coupled with your growth marketing person or growth person who is part of that team. The other thing that's fundamental about this idea is that everyone on that team is bought into the idea that their job is to drive growth. Their job is to help make sure that people can actually successfully use the product. So often, this responsibility is shared by 14 different teams, and none of them really take it seriously. They're all thinking about, the Facebook equivalent of this might be you have a team for newsfeed, and you have a team for profile, and you have a team for dating, and you have a team for groups. But also, you can think about the people using the product as a thing that needs to be worked on by itself. And then you have all the people you need, and they're all bought into this idea that that's what I'm doing. And that's a really fundamental shift in thinking. Okay. That's essential because what you're going to do to drive growth is change the product. If you don't have the people you need to be able to actually change the product, or you're missing some of the disciplines, then this team is just not going to be successful, and none of the things that Denise is going to talk about next, you're actually going to be able to get done. And so this idea of having a dedicated team is just so fundamental to that. The other barrier that often happens at a lot of companies is that you'll have a team, you'll set it up, but actually the way the company is structured means that they're not allowed to go and change the things that need to be changed. And so this team really needs to have permission to change the product. So often, permission to work on this part of the product or that part of the product is siloed into just this one team or that one team, and no one else is allowed to touch that code or change that interface. Well, that's just not going to work because these experiences the experience a person has trying to use your product and get ramped up to it does not just live on one part or another. It's a continuous process across the whole product. And so the growth team really needs to be able to go end to end and think about what improvements can be made on every single one of those steps. Okay? All right. So I like to think about if you don't have strong retention in the first place, or you hire some people who know how to do this sort of work, or you yourself are at the company and you have experience in this background, but you're not set up for success. There's no product growth team. Or you don't have permission to actually change the product. It's like pouring lighter fluid on dead coals. Like, basically, nothing's going to happen. But if you have the ember of a really great product with strong retention that people love, and you hire the right people and set them up for success, it's like throwing lighter fluid on an ember that can grow. And I think that is absolutely I've seen it so many times work if everyone is set up for success. All right. The thing you've all been waiting for, Denise is going to talk through actual examples of things you can do to make your product grow. Take it away.
Thank you. There's a really fine line between removing friction and duping users. Tricking users hurts users. Adding friction also can help or hurt users. Alex Schultz said this when he was explaining what growth and growth marketing do at Facebook. And he was our founder of the growth marketing team about a decade ago. At Facebook, we think about growth as long-term sustainable impact. And as you heard from Brian, we think about growth differently. We set our teams up for success. They are able to change the product and do the things that they need to do. But we also have principles that we abide by for every change that we make. And so I will go into the best practices, but first I want to go over the principles that we live by to make sure that our growth is long-term and sustainable. So we don't do one-time spikes. These are really bad. They either net your growth at exactly where you started over the long term, or in many cases, in a worse spot than it was. The second change that we look at is step changes. And step changes are wonderful things. It's those game of inches that add up over a long period of time. These are things that you can change in your product, just small tweaks, whether it's button copy testing or some other things that we'll cover. And these are good. What's even better is when we see angle shifts, trend changes. This is what we're really trying to get at with everything that we do. Whether it's trying to make a product viral or it's just trying to make changes in such a way that we can see it consistently over that long period of time. All right, now let's get into some examples. The first thing that we're going to look at is personalization. Personalization does not mean the first name at the top of an email. We've been doing that for a long time, and it just doesn't cut it. Personalization means that you're reaching the right people in the right place and at the right time. So let's go through some things so you can see what this looks like. So let's reach the right people. When you reach the right people, you can actually make things super prominent. Our Pages tab, as we like to call it, what houses all of the pages that you own. If we reach out to page admins and put something in context and want it to be prominent, we need to make sure we're reaching out to the right people. So we brought the page admins' pages up to the top in a kind of like your identity placement within the tabs. And this dramatically increased the number of people who were interacting with their pages. It made it so the Pages ecosystem was in a really healthy place. All right, on to the right place. Again, the home page. It is where everybody wants to be. It's where the most eyeballs are. If you do a promotion, you're like, hey, I want to be on your homepage if you're working with a small business. If you're at a large company, you want to be on the homepage, right? Well, in this case, we had this promotion to download Facebook Messenger on the homepage at the very top, very prominent placement, and we thought the same thing. The more eyeballs, the better. But what we actually found is putting it in context was much better. We 7x the number of installs by putting it in a place where people were going, where they wanted to use the Facebook Messenger product because they either wanted to retrieve messages that they were looking at, that they wanted to look at, or they were looking for somebody to chat with. That was the time to reach them. And that 7x the number of installs by just putting it in the right placement, and that placement was not the homepage. Another example of putting things in the right place is our Instagram Direct product. We saw that people were interacting a ton with comment threads, and they were interacting with each other there kind of like a message chat. So we decided to put in line there, right where they were trying to converse with one another anyway, remove the friction from them finding a place privately to have those interactions, and put it right there in line as they're trying to converse with each other back and forth. And we saw this step change that we referred to earlier in the presentation. You actually see that step change in the top line graph for Instagram Direct. So the next thing is reaching people at the right time. This is a cart abandonment promotion, making sure that people knew that they had dropped out of the flow to create an ad. So somebody comes in, they are creating an ad, and for whatever reason, people get busy, connectivity is low, whatever the case may be, they drop out of the funnel. Next time they come back to Facebook, we added this message in order to remind them that they had something waiting for them, had all of the fields pre-filled out for them. And this increased conversions by 12%. You have to remind people when they drop out of the flow that they can come back and revisit it. This one's my personal favorite. When I was hired at the company over 10 years ago, I was hired to work on email marketing. And at the time, they had already tried email and they had said, this isn't going to work. But the way that I thought about email was just different. It wasn't about batch and blast. It wasn't about digests. It wasn't about what you see on the left-hand side. It was about making it personal for people and sending it to them at the right time that provided value to them. So the only difference between the left and the right is that both of them have a coupon code, both of them have a first name. The only difference is we put insights into the email on how you could grow your page by creating an ad. And this had a 40% lift. Another example that is near and dear to my heart as I have worked on things like internet.org over the years is trying to make the site more usable for people who speak English, or maybe they read English and they speak another language, or maybe they read another language and they speak English. I'm always trying to connect the next person to the internet so they can see the value and connect that next person to Facebook. And this, on a research trip, we saw that the food trucks had both languages that people were speaking in the country. And so we decided to try this in what we call our composer. Could it work for us if it was working for the food trucks? And it did. It increased the number of posts that people were seeing by millions just by putting both languages on there that we thought people would be speaking in that market. So huge wins when people actually understand what you're trying to say. Within our companies, we use a lot of jargon and that type of thing. And so it's also important not just to speak the language, but to actually test what you're trying to say to each change you make, with each change you make. So the next few examples I will go through talk about testing your buttons. How many of you test every single button you ship? Okay. Maybe some of them. None of them. Okay. We don't do this enough. It's so basic, but it can have huge returns. This example comes from another thing that I'm super excited for the company for. This past year, we announced that people on Facebook have used our tools to raise over $1 billion in fundraising. And we thought that this was pretty straightforward. Raise money was a term that we thought was straightforward because people use it internally and externally. And we wanted people before their birthday to ensure that they were sharing this with their friends so they could raise as much as they possibly could. And we decided to just test this, do one test. We didn't think much of it. We tested a bunch of variants. Changing the text from raise money, which was very internal, we now know, to select nonprofit, which is the next step that the user would be taking anyway, increased fundraisers by 20%. It's so basic. Test your buttons. Huge, huge yields, and it's super easy. All right, moving on to feature phones or basic phones as they're known as. This is our registration form that we used to have on our basic phone, our basic site. And on these sites, you have to click each time you want to get somewhere. So this is a login page, and I don't know how many of you can actually find the registration link, but I know I had a tough time finding it. Not to mention, you have to click all the way down past the login button to actually register. So we added a button, a second button to sign up, and it increased registrations by 8%. We didn't stop there. We knew there was more we needed to do. So we changed the button color. We had another button, and we changed the button color, and that increased registration by 11%. Then we changed the button text and did that basic button texting that we just talked about, and it increased registration by 16%. Removing the barrier of people trying to find the button in the first place, removing the barrier of people having to click down 10 times before they're able to register to even get to the registration page, then making the button in a prominent way so it's findable, and then just simply testing the text had huge yields. All right, so remove the steps you don't need is the next and final thing that we're going to talk about. Removing the friction is really important. This is on our Facebook Lite app, and when you click See More on the Facebook Lite, we were loading another page. This is really bad for users, especially users who don't have great connectivity, which is a lot of users who use our Facebook Lite product. So we instead load it inline within the newsfeed, and it led to a ton more time spent in newsfeed, which leads to a ton of satisfaction with your friends now that you're actually interacting with their posts. So remove that one step that you don't need. Another example of removing steps you don't need, we had this redirect. Going from our page to download Facebook Lite, we had this redirect before Google Play, and the kicker is it was only used for Facebook engineering purposes. It was a technical purpose. It had no purpose for the user. So we found a workaround where we didn't need it for technical purposes, sent them straight to Google Play, and it increased conversions and downloads by 15%. Again, an example of removing friction. Remove friction and don't add it, but make sure you test it. This is on our basic site, our mobile basic site. We decided that we were going to test 3 pages instead of 1, because that's a lot to fill out on that one page. This is the one example that I've had over the years where removing friction actually hurt the user. This decreased registration by 20%, and you may ask why. It's because every page load in a market where there's low connectivity, you're gonna have some drop off. And so because this page is for those types of markets, it had a huge drop off in registration, so we reverted. All right, to summarize the principles that we live by on the Facebook growth team, one-time spikes are really bad. We don't do them, and we try to educate people as much as possible to avoid them. One-time step changes are really good, and it's those game of inches that you can get. They're quick wins. And then finally, those angle shifts are the ones that you really want to strive towards. All right, so I want everybody to take out your phones. Many of you have them out right now. I want you to take out your phone and put it in your hand. And right when you leave this room, I want you to remind yourself of one thing you've learned, one thing that you want to change in your product that abides by the principles to make a change that's really good for your users. It reduces friction. It's personalized in the right way, not just a first name and an email. You're testing your buttons so that people actually understand them. So before you do anything, make sure you check your retention. Set your growth team up for success by making them able to change the product. Personalize for the right people in the right place and at the right time. Calls to action really matter. Make sure you're testing your buttons and remove friction. Don't add it. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.